Jake had always been the type of person others felt comfortable talking to. Maybe it was his calm way of listening, or how he never judged anyone for their problems. Whatever it was, people seemed to open up to him naturally. He was 24 and in his second year studying art therapy at college. Most days, he felt like he was still figuring things out himself, but somehow his classmates saw him as someone they could trust. The semester had been tough for everyone. Their professor, Dr. Williams, had given them a challenging assignment. Each student had to create a series of self-portraits that showed something real about themselves. Not just happy, smiling pictures, but something deeper. Something that reveals who they truly were underneath it all. The assignment was worth almost half their grade, so nobody could afford to mess it up. Jake had finished his project weeks ago. He photographed himself in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by old drawings and art supplies. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it told his story honestly. He'd always found peace in creating things, even as a kid when life got complicated at home, after their weekly class where everyone shared their work. Jake was packing up his supplies when someone approached him. It was Lisa, a quiet girl who sat in the back row. She was talented, probably one of the best artists in their program, but she rarely spoke up during discussions. Her work was always technically perfect, but lately, Jake had noticed something different about her. She seemed distant, like she was carrying something heavy. "Hey Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I talk to you about something?" Jake looked up from his bag. Lisa's hands were shaking slightly, and she kept glancing around the room as if she was worried someone might overhear them. "Of course," Jake said. "What's going on?" Lisa waited until the last few students had left the classroom. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the empty desks. She sat down heavily in the chair next to him. "I'm stuck on the assignment," she began, then stopped. She took a deep breath and tried again. "Actually, that's not exactly true. I know what I want to do, but I can't do it alone." Jake set down his bag and gave her his full attention. He could tell this wasn't just about schoolwork. "About 8 months ago, I was in a really bad car accident," Lisa continued, her voice getting steadier as she spoke. "I was driving home from work, and this truck ran a red light, hit me head on." Jake's stomach dropped. He wondered why Lisa had started the program late, joining their class in the spring instead of the fall like everyone else. "I was trapped in my car for over an hour before they could get me out," she said. "The doctors did an amazing job. Don't get me wrong, they saved my life. But the recovery process left me with scars. Lots of them, across my arms, my chest, my back." She pulled up her sleeves slightly, and Jake could see the edge of what looked like surgical scars disappearing under her shirt. They were healed but still visible, creating patterns across her skin like a roadmap of everything she'd been through. "The thing is," Lisa continued, "I want my project to be about this. About learning to live with a body that feels different. Now, about accepting these marks as part of my story instead of trying to hide them all the time." Jake nodded, beginning to understand why she'd come to him. "But the concept I have in mind." She paused, clearly struggling with how to explain it. "I need to photograph myself in a way that shows the scars. Not in a shocking way or anything inappropriate, but honestly. And I need someone I trust to help me with the technical stuff. Someone who can handle the camera while I focus on the poses and the lighting." Jake felt honored that she'd chosen him, but also nervous. This was clearly important to her, and he didn't want to mess it up. "I've been putting it off for weeks," Lisa admitted. "The deadline is next Friday, and I'm running out of time. I know it's a weird request, and I understand if you're not comfortable with it." "No, it's not weird at all," Jake said quickly. "Actually, I think it sounds like it could be really powerful. Art therapy is supposed to help people process difficult experiences, right? This sounds exactly like what our program is about." Lisa's shoulders relaxed for the first time since she'd sat down. "The thing is," she said, "I've been so self-conscious about how I look now. I avoid mirrors. I wear long sleeves even when it's hot. I haven't been to a beach or pool since the accident." But I'm tired of letting fear control my life. I want to take back some power over my own story. Jake understood completely. He'd seen this in other students too. People who'd been through traumatic experiences and were using art to work through their feelings. About it, when were you thinking of doing this? He asked. Would this weekend work? We could use the photography studio after hours when it's quiet. I've already checked. And it's available Saturday afternoon. Jake nodded. That sounds perfect. Do you have everything else you need? Lighting equipment, props, whatever? I've been collecting things for weeks, Lisa said, seeming more confident now that they had a plan. Fabric, different textures, some objects that are meaningful to me. I have a whole vision for how I want it to look. As they talked through the details, Jake found himself impressed by how much thought Lisa had put into this project. She wasn't just taking pictures for the sake of the assignment. She was using this opportunity to confront something that had been holding her back for months. Thank you, Lisa said as they finished planning. I really didn't know who else to ask. This means more to me than you probably realize. Jake smiled. That's what classmates are for, right? Besides, I have a feeling this is going to be something really special. Saturday afternoon came faster than Jake had expected. He arrived at the photography studio 15 minutes early, his nerves getting the better of him. The building was almost empty, with just the sound of his footsteps echoing through the hallways. He used his student ID to unlock the studio door and flipped on the lights. The room was bigger than he remembered, with white walls and several large windows that let in natural light. Photography equipment was stored neatly along one wall, and there were different colored backdrops rolled up and ready to use. Jake had used this space before for regular class projects, but today felt completely different. He was checking the camera equipment when he heard a soft knock on the door. Lisa peeked her head in, carrying a large canvas bag that looked heavy. I brought way too much stuff, she said with a nervous laugh as she set the bag down. I couldn't decide what I might need, so I just grabbed everything. Jake helped her unpack the bag. Inside were pieces of sheer fabric in different colors, some heavier materials like cotton and linen, a few meaningful objects like an old bracelet, and a small mirror, and even some flower petals she collected from her apartment's garden. I've been thinking about this project for months, Lisa explained as she arranged her materials on a nearby table. At first, I was angry about the scars. Then I was sad. Then I just felt disconnected from my own body, like it belonged to someone else. Jake nodded as he set up the camera on its tripod. He'd learned in his classes that trauma could make people feel separated from themselves, like they were watching their life happen to someone else. But lately, I've been thinking differently, Lisa continued. These marks tell a story. They're proof that I survived something terrible. Maybe instead of hiding them, I should honor them somehow. She walked over to the windows and tested how. The light fell across different areas of the room. Jake could see she'd really thought this through. This wasn't just a school assignment for her anymore. It was something much more personal. The thing is, Lisa said, turning back to face him, I need to ask you for something specific. And it might sound strange. Jake finished adjusting the camera settings and looked up at her. What do you need? Lisa took a deep breath. For this to work, I need to be able to show the scars on my torso and back. But I'm still not comfortable with someone looking at me while I position myself. I know that probably sounds contradictory since we're taking photographs, but I need to maintain some control over the process. Jake waited, sensing she had more to explain. What I was thinking is this, Lisa said, speaking faster now as if she needed to get the words out before she lost her nerve. I could get ready while you close your eyes or look away. Then when I'm positioned the way I want, I'll tell you to look and take the photo. After that, you look away again while I adjust for the next shot. Jake understood immediately. This wasn't about the photos themselves. It was about Lisa feeling safe and in control during a vulnerable moment. That makes perfect sense, he said. You're trusting me to be here. But you also need to feel like you have power over the situation. Exactly, Lisa said, relief clear in her voice. I knew you'd understand. They spent the next few minutes discussing the technical details. Lisa showed him the composition she'd sketched out. explaining how she wanted to use the fabric and lighting to create images that were artistic, rather than clinical. She wanted the scars to be visible, but integrated into something beautiful. I don't want people to look at these photos and just see injury, she explained. I want them to see strength. I want them to see that a person can be changed by something difficult and still be whole. Jake felt honored to be part of this process. In all his art therapy classes, he learned about the healing power of creative expression. But he'd never seen it in action quite like this. Lisa walked over to her bag and pulled out a long piece of soft, cream-colored fabric. "I think I'll start with this one," she said. "It was actually a curtain from my childhood bedroom. My mom saved it when we moved, and I found it in storage after the accident. Something about using it now feels right." She moved to the area where the light was best and turned to Jake. "Are you ready for this?" Jake positioned himself behind the camera and checked that everything was set up correctly. "Whenever you are," he said. "Okay," Lisa said, her voice quiet but determined. "I'm going to get ready now. Please close your eyes." Jake closed his eyes and listened to the soft sounds of Lisa moving around the studio. He could hear fabric rustling and her careful footsteps as she positioned herself. He found himself thinking about how much courage this must be taking. Not just the vulnerability of the photos, but the trust she was placing in him to be respectful and professional. "Jake," Lisa's voice came from across the room, "you can open your eyes now." When Jake opened his eyes, he saw Lisa positioned with the cream fabric draped carefully across her body. The scars on her arms and the visible portion of her torso weren't hidden, but they were part of a larger composition that was genuinely beautiful. The afternoon light coming through the windows created a soft glow, and Lisa's expression was peaceful but strong. Jake took several shots from different angles, then immediately closed his eyes again. "That felt good," Lisa said, surprise in her voice. "It felt like I was taking back control of my own story." They continued this careful process for the next hour, with Lisa trying different fabrics and poses while Jake served as both photographer and respectful guardian of her privacy. With each series of photos, Lisa seemed to grow more confident, more connected to herself. "I think we're getting something really special here," Jake said during one of their breaks, reviewing the images on the camera's small screen. Lisa looked at the photos and smiled for the first time that day. "I actually recognize myself in these," she said softly. "I feel like me again." By the time they'd been working for almost 2 hours, something remarkable had happened. Lisa's whole energy had changed. Where she'd started nervous and hesitant, she was now moving with purpose and confidence. Jake could hear it in her voice when she gave him directions, and he could see it in the photos they were creating together. "I want to try something different now," Lisa said during one of their breaks. She was looking through her collection of fabrics, holding up a deep blue piece that caught the light beautifully. "This was my grandmother's scarf. She gave it to me right before she passed away last year." Jake watched as Lisa examined the fabric, running her fingers along its edges. He could tell this next series of photos was going to be even more meaningful. "She always told me that our bodies tell the stories of our lives," Lisa continued. "When I was little, I used to trace the lines on her hands and ask her about each wrinkle, each spot. She'd make up these amazing stories about adventures and experiences that left their mark on her." Lisa walked back to her position by the windows. The late afternoon sun was starting to shift, creating longer shadows and warmer light across the studio floor. "I think I'm ready to try something more challenging," she said, looking directly at Jake. "I want to show more of the scars this time. The ones across my back and shoulder. They're the biggest ones, and they're the ones I've been most afraid to look at." Jake nodded, understanding the significance of what she was saying. This wasn't just about completing a school assignment anymore. Lisa was using this opportunity to face the parts of herself she'd been avoiding since the accident. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Jake asked gently. "We can always do more sessions if you need time." "No," Lisa said firmly. "I'm ready. I can feel it. For the first time since the accident, I actually want to see myself completely." She positioned herself with her back partially toward the camera, the blue scarf draped in a way that would reveal the surgical scars that ran across her shoulder blade and down her spine. Jake closed his eyes as she got ready, listening to her quiet movements and steady breathing. "Okay," Lisa's voice came softly. "You can look now." When Jake opened his eyes, he was struck by what he saw. The scars were visible, yes, but they didn't look like flaws or damage. In the golden afternoon light, with the blue fabric creating contrast and movement, they looked like part of an intricate design. Like Lisa's grandmother had said, they were telling the story of her life. Jake took several photos, capturing different angles and expressions. Lisa's face, visible in profile, showed a kind of peace he hadn't seen from her before. "How does it feel?" Jake asked softly, not wanting to break the moment. "It feels like I'm meeting myself again," Lisa replied, "like I'm saying hello to parts of me that I've been ignoring." They continued working, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Lisa was no longer asking Jake to close his eyes between every shot. She was moving naturally, adjusting the fabric and her position with growing confidence. Jake found himself thinking about how powerful it was to witness someone reclaiming their relationship with their own body. "You know what's funny?" Lisa said as she tried a different pose. "I spent so many months thinking these scars made me ugly or broken, but looking at them through the camera lens, seeing them as part of a larger picture, they just look like proof that I'm strong." Jake smiled as he continued taking photos. That's exactly what good art therapy is supposed to do. Help people see themselves differently. "I think I understand now why you're so good at this," Lisa said. "You don't just take pictures or listen to people talk about their problems. You create a safe space where someone can discover things about themselves." As the sun began to set, casting even more dramatic light through the studio windows, Lisa tried one final series of poses. This time, she used multiple pieces of fabric, creating a complex composition that incorporated flowers, her grandmother's scarf, and the childhood curtain material. "I want this last set to show the whole journey," she explained. "The past, the trauma, the healing, and the future, all of it together." Jake took his time with these final shots, knowing they were capturing something truly special. When he looked at the images on the camera's screen, he could see a complete transformation from the photos they'd taken at the beginning of the session. "Lisa," he said quietly, "you need to see these." She came over to look at the camera's display, and Jake watched her face as she scrolled through the images, her eyes filled with tears. But they weren't sad tears. "I can't believe that's me," she whispered. I look beautiful." "You are beautiful," Jake said simply. "The scars don't change that. If anything, they add to it because they show what you survived." Lisa wiped her eyes and looked around the studio. The late afternoon had turned into early evening, and the space felt different now. What had started as a place where she felt vulnerable and exposed now felt like somewhere she found herself again. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to Jake. "You didn't just help me with a school project. You helped me find my way back to myself." Jake packed up the camera equipment while Lisa carefully folded her fabrics and put them back in her bag. The session was over, but both of them knew something important had happened in this room. "The real work starts now," Lisa said as they prepared to leave. "I have to edit these photos and present them to the class. But for the first time since the accident, I'm actually excited to share my story." As they walked out of the studio together, Jake reflected on what he learned. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is simply create a space where they feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give is knowing when to close your eyes and when to witness someone's courage. The weeks following the photography session brought changes that neither Jake nor Lisa had expected. For Lisa, the transformation was immediate and profound. She found herself walking differently, standing straighter, making eye contact with people in ways she hadn't since before the accident. It was as if the afternoon in the studio had unlocked something inside her that had been locked away for months. Jake noticed the change right away when they met for their regular study group. That Tuesday, Lisa was wearing a shorter sleeved shirt than usual, and though her scars were still partially covered, She wasn't trying to hide them completely anymore. When their classmate Alex complimented her new haircut, Lisa actually smiled and said thank you instead of deflecting the attention like she used to. "How are you feeling about the presentation next week?" Jake asked as they packed up their books after studying. The final critiques were scheduled for Friday, and everyone had to present their self-portrait projects to the entire class. "Nervous but excited," Lisa admitted. "I keep looking at the photos we took, and I still can't believe they're really me. I printed a few of them yesterday, and seeing them larger made them feel even more real." Jake had been thinking about that afternoon a lot too, but for different reasons. The experience had taught him something important about his future career. He'd always known he wanted to help people through art therapy, but he hadn't fully understood what that meant until he witnessed Lisa's transformation. It wasn't just about teaching people to draw or paint. It was about creating spaces where people could safely explore the most difficult parts of their lives. "I've been thinking about specializing in trauma recovery," Jake told Lisa as they walked across campus together. "What happened in the studio made me realize that's where I want to focus my career." Lisa stopped walking and looked at him. "Really?" "Because of our session, partly," Jake said, "but also because I realized how much I learned about myself too. I discovered that I'm good at holding space for people during vulnerable moments. That's a skill I want to develop more." They reached the point where their paths split to go to their respective dorms, but neither of them seemed ready to end the conversation. "Jake," Lisa said, "I want you to know that what you did for me wasn't just helping with a school project. You probably saved me from giving up on this whole program. I was seriously considering dropping out before we did that session." Jake was surprised. Lisa had always seemed dedicated to her studies. Even when she was struggling, "I felt so disconnected from everything," she continued. "From my body, from my art, from other people. I couldn't see how I was supposed to help anyone else heal when I felt so broken myself. But that afternoon showed me that healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about integrating your experiences into who you're becoming." Over the next few days, Jake watched Lisa prepare for her presentation with a focus and enthusiasm he'd never seen from her before. She spent hours in the computer lab, carefully editing her photos and writing the artist's statement that would accompany her work. She asked Jake to look at her draft, and he was impressed by how thoughtfully she'd articulated her journey. "I want to be honest about the accident and the recovery process," she explained. "But I also want people to understand that this project wasn't about seeking pity or shocking anyone. It was about reclaiming my relationship with my own story." The day of the presentations arrived with typical spring weather, bright and warm with a gentle breeze coming through the classroom windows. Jake could tell Lisa was nervous as students began setting up their work around the room, but she also seemed determined. When it was Lisa's turn to present, she stood in front of her carefully arranged photographs with a confidence that surprised even Jake. The images were displayed on large boards, and the afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to make them glow. "8 months ago, I was in a car accident that changed my life in ways I never expected," Lisa began, her voice clear and steady. "For a long time, I thought those changes were only negative. I felt like the person I used to be had disappeared, and I didn't know who I was supposed to be." Now, Jake watched as his classmates leaned forward, clearly engaged by Lisa's honesty. Dr. Williams, their professor, was taking notes, but also seemed genuinely moved by what she was hearing. "These photographs represent a collaboration with my classmate, Jake, who helped me create a safe space to explore my relationship with my changed body." Lisa continued, "But more than that, they represent a moment when I stopped seeing my scars as damage and started seeing them as proof of survival." She walked through each image, explaining her artistic choices and the emotions she'd been processing. When she talked about using her grandmother's scarf and the childhood curtain, several students in the class were visibly emotional. "The most important thing I learned from this project," Lisa concluded, "is that healing doesn't mean erasing difficult experiences. It means integrating them into a larger story about who we're becoming. These scars will always be part of me, but they don't define me." They're just one chapter in a much bigger story. The room was quiet for a moment after she finished, and then the questions and comments began. Jake was amazed by how thoughtfully his classmates responded to Lisa's work. They asked about her artistic process, her emotional journey, and how the project had changed her perspective on art therapy. Dr. Williams saved her comments for last. "Lisa, this is exactly what art therapy is meant to accomplish," she said. "You've used creative expression not just to process trauma, but to transform your relationship with it and Jake. Your role as collaborator in this project shows a deep understanding of therapeutic boundaries and support after class." Several students approached Lisa to thank her for sharing such a personal story. Jake could see how energized she was by the positive response, but more importantly, he could see how proud she was of herself for having the courage to be so vulnerable. In front of their peers, "I feel like I finally know who I am again," Lisa told Jake as they walked out of the building together. "Not who I was before the accident, but who I'm becoming because of everything I've been through." A year and a half after that transformative afternoon in the photography studio, Jake found himself in a small office at the Riverside Trauma Recovery Center, reviewing case files before his first client meeting of the day. The walls were decorated with artwork created by patients during their healing journeys, and natural light streamed through large windows that overlooked a peaceful garden. He'd been working at the center for 6 months now, after finishing his master's degree with a specialization in trauma recovery. Every day brought new challenges, but also moments of profound connection with people who were working to rebuild their lives after difficult experiences. The skills he learned that day with Lisa had become the foundation of his therapeutic approach. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lisa, who now lived 3 states away in Portland, where she'd started her own photography business. Just finished a session with a burn survivor who's been avoiding mirrors for 2 years. Used our technique with the closed eyes. She cried when she saw the photos. "Thank you for teaching me that healing happens in safe spaces." Jake smiled as he read the message. Lisa had found her calling in portrait photography, specifically working with people who'd experienced trauma or medical procedures that changed their appearance. She developed a unique approach that combined artistic photography with therapeutic principles, helping people reconnect with their bodies and their sense of self-worth. They stayed in touch regularly, sharing stories about their work and the people they were helping. Lisa often referred clients to trauma centers like Jake's, and he sometimes suggested photography as a therapeutic tool for his patients. The collaboration that had started in college had grown into a professional partnership that spanned hundreds of miles. Jake's first appointment that morning was with a woman named Riley, who'd been coming to the center for 3 weeks. She'd been in a house fire that left her with burns on her arms and neck, and she was struggling with feelings of shame and disconnection from her body. Jake had been thinking about suggesting art therapy, but he'd been waiting for the right moment. "How are you feeling today?" Jake asked as Riley settled into the comfortable chair across from his desk. "Better, I think," Riley said, though her voice was uncertain. "I actually looked in the bathroom mirror this morning for the first time in weeks. Just for a few seconds, but still." Jake nodded encouragingly. "That sounds like progress." "What was that experience like for you?" "Scary, but also kind of relieving," Riley admitted. "I've been so afraid of seeing myself that I think I made it worse in my imagination." "Then it really is?" Jake leaned forward slightly. "Riley, I want to suggest something that might sound unusual, but I think it could be helpful for you. Have you ever considered using photography as part of your healing process?" Riley looked skeptical. "You mean like taking pictures of myself? I don't think I'm ready for that." "Not necessarily taking pictures," Jake explained, "but working with a photographer who specializes in helping people reconnect with their bodies after trauma. Someone who understands the emotional challenges you're facing." He told Riley about Lisa's work, explaining how she created safe spaces for people to explore their relationship with their changed appearance. He described the technique they developed, where clients could maintain control over when and how they were seen. "She's worked with burn survivors before," Jake said, "and she's incredibly skilled at creating images that show people's strength and beauty not just their injuries. Riley was quiet for a moment, considering the idea. Would you be there too? She asked. I trust you. And the idea of working with someone I don't know feels overwhelming. Lisa works with local therapists all the time, Jake assured her. If you decide you want to try this, I could absolutely be part of the process. They spent the rest of the session talking through Riley's concerns in hopes, by the end of their meeting, she'd agreed to think about the photography sessions. And Jake could see a spark of curiosity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. After Riley left, Jake called Lisa to discuss the potential collaboration. Even across the distance, he could hear the excitement in her voice when he described Riley's situation. I have a colleague in your area who does exactly this kind of work, Lisa said. Her name is Maya, and she trained with me last year. She's amazing with burn survivors specifically. How did you end up training other photographers? Jake asked. He knew Lisa's business had grown, but he hadn't realized she was teaching her methods to others. It started by accident, Lisa laughed. Other photographers kept reaching out after seeing my work online, asking how I approached sessions with trauma survivors. I realized there was a real need for this kind of specialized training. Lisa had developed a certification program for photographers who wanted to work therapeutically with people recovering from trauma. She taught them not just the technical aspects of photography, but also the emotional skills needed to hold space for vulnerable clients. We've trained over 40 photographers now, Lisa continued. They're working with burn survivors, accident victims, people recovering from surgeries, anyone who's struggling with body image after a traumatic experience. Jake was amazed by how far Lisa's work had expanded. What had started as a college, our project had become a movement that was helping people across the country. You know what's funny, Lisa said. I still have that first photo we took hanging in my living room, the one with my grandmother's scarf. It reminds me every day that healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone new. After they hung up, Jake sat in his office thinking about the ripple effects of that single afternoon. In the photography studio, Lisa had not only healed herself, but had created a way to help hundreds of other people heal too. He was using the insights from that experience to help his own clients every day. His phone buzzed with another message from Lisa. She'd attached a photo of a certificate on her wall, recognizing her work with trauma survivors. But what struck Jake most was the note she'd included. None of this would have happened without a friend who was willing to close his eyes and trust me to find my own way to healing. Jake realized that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone isn't to fix their problems or take away their pain. Sometimes it's simply to create a safe space where they can discover their own strength and learn to see themselves with compassion and hope.